Hello, hello, everyone. Marjorie Roman here, and we have another episode of the podcast, King of Commercial Real Estate. And we're honored to have the king himself, Dolf de Roos. Thank you for coming today.
Hi, Marjorie. My pleasure as always.
And today we're going to talk about a little difficult topic. I feel like most people nowadays, they have financial issues and they deal with debt. So first of all, is there good debt or bad debt? Is debt good?
Well, you're absolutely right. There are two kinds of debt. The bad debt you want to avoid like the plague, and the good debt you want to acquire more of it. I often say that some people don't sleep well at night if they have too much debt. I don't sleep well at night if I have too little debt, but it's got to be the good debt. So let's define them. Bad debt is debt secured to acquire assets that go down in value. So if you and I want to go jet skiing this weekend and we don't have the money to buy a jet ski for cash, and we say, well, let's just put it on a card or something like that. That is debt to buy an asset where the moment we wheel it out of the shop, assuming it's a new jet ski, it's going to go down in value. And when we crash it into a few logs and bend the propeller on goodness knows what, the value is going to go down even more. And at the end of 5 years, when we're still only halfway through paying off this silly jet ski, the value's gone to 1/10 of what it was when we bought it. That is bad debt because now we still have to pay money on something. But if you buy, for instance, it's a favorite topic of mine, but if you buy real estate and it goes up in value, the way real estate in the United States has gone up about 45% in the last 3 years. There's been a tremendous run up. It is normally not always that strong, but it averages between 7 and 9% every year compounding. So if you take on debt to acquire assets that go up in value, that is great debt. I wish I could have acquired $1 billion of debt 5 years ago and had that 45% rise. I would have had $450 million worth of equity that we would have created out of thin air, and I could sell everything and pay off the $1 billion of debt instead of the $450 million. Why would you not do that?
That's right. Now, when it comes to bad debt, though, what are some of the examples that you could give us on bad debt and that you have seen most people get into?
Anything that doesn't generate income. So you take on debt to buy a car because you want a fancy car. You want a car that you can't afford yet, but you want to buy it. So you spend a lot of money getting this car loan on it. Or you want to renovate your house. Well, that's something that's sort of borderline, because if it's a house that you rent out, that might be you might get extra rent from it. But you want to go on a vacation somewhere. You want to have a round-the-world cruise that costs $58,000.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, people do that, and they put it on a credit card. Or you want to buy toys that you don't need, or a fancy watch, or things like that. These things tend not to go up in value.
And they're really common things that pretty much you wouldn't think that they're going to generate a huge debt down along the line. But as you look at all the interest that you're going to have to pay later on, it just adds up really quick. Now, when it comes to all of these people that are dealing with all of these debt, what's your advice to them? Because I know that some of our audience out there, they may be like, oh no, but I have this huge credit card debt. What should I do, Dolf? Can I invest? What would you recommend to people like that?
Well, you mentioned credit card debt. That tends to have some of the highest interest rates in the industry. Credit card debt typically is between 21 and 24% per annum. That is huge. And I would say it's probably smart to pay that off before you do anything else. Unless you can invest in something that generates more than that. But typically, most investments that people get into generate, somewhere up to 10%. So one of the best investments you can make is pay off debt that is costing you 24% per annum. And it's compounding.
That's right.
And then stop using that credit card for things you don't need to impress people you don't know. It's like, why do we need all this fancy stuff? I find that people spend more time every 2 years upgrading their cars and reading consumer reports and reading other magazine articles and online and taking cars for test drives and comparing the brake horsepower and the torque in terms of Newton meters and how many miles per gallon they'll get. And more time doing that every 2 years than they spend in their lifetimes looking for a single investment property. And yet the irony is that if they'd bought that investment property 5 years ago, they could buy a new car with the profits today.
That's right.
So we've got to change our priorities. Tone down your living standard. We all aspire to live the good life and to have a bigger house and have a better car or a second car for weekends. We need a sports car on the weekend. No, you don't. Any car gets you there just as well as any other car. Maybe not in the comfort and luxury that you'd like to aspire to, But those same people who right now would buy a fancy car that they can't afford, they wouldn't think of buying a helicopter to get them around town. That's ridiculous. And yet for someone who doesn't have the fancy car, buying the fancy car is a bit ridiculous too. So tone down your expectations or just be more creative and generate more revenue. Most people don't spend time into figuring out what can I contribute to society that society will appreciate so much that they'll throw money at me. They'd rather go home and watch TV. So stop watching TV and then start paying off your credit card debt. I know that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's totally fine. And in fact, it's interesting how you mentioned that some people may need some kind of reality check and see where their economic situation is instead of just spending the money that they do not have on things that they don't really need.
Right.
I still remember my mom telling me, if you want to buy like a super fancy car, make sure that you do it, but pay it in cash. And if you're able to do so, then yes, of course you could get it. But maybe at that point, you may want to think about something else that you could get with that cash or someone else that you could help with that cash instead of buying that fancy car that is just going to be sitting there in your garage. So it's a little bit of a mindset change that I feel like we as a society need when it comes to
right. And we have to trade
money.
off the pleasures we want to experience today for the pleasures that we will be able to afford tomorrow if we just defer buying something today. So if you're buying a $100,000 car and you decide that green is the way to go, you need an electric car, you want to buy one of the latest Teslas or Lucids, whatever, and let's round the numbers and say it's going to cost you $100,000. If you have to borrow that $100,000 to buy the car, and we know that in all probability it's going to go down. I know with supply chain constraints there have been a few instances where cars, especially electric cars, have gone up in the last few years, but in the long run they go down in value. So you spend $100,000 of borrowed money to buy a car that goes down in value, you're going to be paying for that for a long time. But if you use that same $100,000 of borrowed money to buy a piece of real estate, and you leverage that even some more, and you buy a $300,000 property, it goes up in value. If not at 45% every 3 years, the way in the last 3 years, it might go up by 20% in 3 years. That's the average. And then you wait another 3 years, you'll be able to buy that car with cash, and then you won't have to have a debt that you're going to be paying off for the next 12 years. So just defer your pleasure. And when we're born with no money. The only money we can ascribe to our name is what our parents might deem to be ours, but our parents aren't going to buy us a brand new car the day we're born. So getting a car is a deferred pleasure. Just defer it a few years longer. You don't need that fancy car. I know you want to impress someone. You think you'll get a better girlfriend or boyfriend by having a fancy car, and especially if you put a really loud sound system in there so that the windows vibrate with every boom. Everyone seems to think that's a babe magnet or a guy magnet. It's not. Just limit what you think you need or want, and then, live within your means and invest into assets that generate income.
That's true. And you did mention about investments and how sometimes you can use your own investments to leverage all of the income that you're getting and use it towards paying your debt. So what are some of the ways that you have seen people doing that?
Well, I wouldn't invest in something as a means of paying off your debt. I think it's smarter to pay off the debt first, especially if it's high debt. But yes, if you've got, an investment property that's generating $15,000 a year in surplus income, don't spend it on holidays yet. Get rid of that credit card debt.
That's true.
I mean, I came across something just recently. He's in his mid-50s, and he's got $170,000 of credit card debt between him and his wife. And I said, guys, how did you get to this? Well, we don't know. And they got a grant from the government because they ran a business. I forget what it was called, but it was some grant to get keep salaries paid. And they said, well, what should we do with this money? I said, for heaven's sake, get rid of that credit card debt so you're not paying high interest rates on it, and then use it for what it was intended, to conform to the rules of getting that grant. And they ended up not doing that. They didn't seem to think that paying off the credit card debt was important. And it's a mindset. And again, I put the blame, if there is such a thing as blame, and because we should have more self-awareness, but I put part of the reasoning why this came about on schools, because they don't spend an hour talking about financial literacy. They don't talk about the difference between good debt and bad debt. They don't talk about the difference between an asset and a liability. They describe an asset as anything that's got some value. Well, on that basis, a car that you're paying, a high interest rate on to own is an asset. No, an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, and a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. So the home you live in is actually a liability because it's costing you money, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. You have to balance that, of course, against what you'd be paying if you rent it. And it could be a great deal, and in the long run, you get the capital growth. But as long as we get clear on what truly an asset is and what a liability truly is, until that happens, we're still going to make silly decisions where we have $170-some thousand of credit card debt and don't think it's anything bad. It's a bizarre situation.
That's true. And then again, it all comes down to the mindset of people, the ideas that they have towards debt. As you mentioned, there's good debt, there's bad debt, and any last piece of advice to give some hope to our viewers who are dealing with and struggling with debt that you could give them, so they can have that hope, that happiness, that yes, they can overcome that obstacle.
Well, yes, I'm happy to give some. I hope that their hope doesn't come from my words, but because of their own actions. But, we live in this place, in a society, in a time where if you're creative and you come up with something that people want, if people want it, they will pay you money for it. So there's no excuse not to generate the money that you want to have available to you. There are so many things you can do, and there are examples all around us. You've just got to get off your butt, basically, and go and do something, anything. So stop doing frivolous things. Stop going to nightclubs every night. Stop watching TV and all these soaps and all these series that don't really benefit you, and see what you can create. And most people who sit down, and it could be the most ridiculous thing. It could be a dog sitting service or a pool cleaning service or anything like that. Although there are lots of pool cleaners around, it obviously works. But do something, add value to someone else's life, and they'll pay you for it. And then get leverage. You don't have to clean every pool yourself. You can have a team of 20 pool cleaners that you manage, and then get someone in to manage them, and you just own the business. But anyone can do this sort of thing. You've got to get out there and create something, because when you create something, the world rewards you for that. And then pay off your debt. I live debt-free. I have credit cards, but I don't have a balance that I carry. In fact, my credit card balance gets paid automatically. I don't even have to do it myself every month. And I know the banks consider me a bit of a freeloader because I use a credit card and I get free credit and I never pay interest on it because I always pay it off. And you might say, well, you're lucky because you've got the money to pay it off. Yes, but I also don't buy frivolous things, right? You've got to tame what your aspirations are as to what you want to own. I don't need a $20,000 watch. It doesn't tell time any better than my cheap. It's an Apple Watch, but it's always accurate. It's synced to my phone, which is synced to the satellites and all that, and it's accurate to within a fraction of a second. Now, if you want a $20,000 watch, by all means, go and get it. I'm not saying you should live like a pauper, not at all. But make sure you pay for those things, as Marjorie said, out of cash. Don't put them on a credit card, because then you go down a slippery slope of eventually you're paying more in interest than you're earning in income. As long as your income exceeds your expenses, you'll have a great life. Temper your expectations as to what you can buy. Don't buy a Rolex every day because you want one for every day of the year. That would be ridiculous. Well, so is having one for every month of the year. And, maybe having one for you isn't quite the right thing to do because you're not in an income position yet to afford it. Live within your means and then invest. Invest, put your assets into things that generate further income and live off the money generated by your money. Don't swap time for money. When you do that, you can have a really great life. It'll be fun.
That's true. Thank you so much again, Dolf. And thank you to our audience for staying tuned to this podcast. So there you have it. As Dolf said, you can create your own future. Just make sure that you're wise with the assets that you currently own. We're going to see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.